The attack came without warning. One moment, Luna City was alive with the usual sounds of 2 million people going about their daily lives. The next moment, everything changed forever. Admiral Henry Blake sat in his office on the moon reviewing supply reports from Mars. He was 58 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes. He had served in the Earth Defense Fleet for 35 years. In all that time, humanity had never faced a real threat from space. Sure, there were tensions with other alien species, trade disputes, border disagreements, but nothing serious, nothing worth fighting over. His daughter Sarah worked in the medical center on the other side of Luna City. She was a doctor, just like her mother had been. Blake smiled thinking about her. She was planning to visit Earth next month for his birthday. 59 years old. When did he get so old? The first explosion shook his office. Coffee spilled across his desk. Alarms began screaming throughout the facility. Blake jumped to his feet and rushed to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 massive ships hung in the black sky above the moon. They were unlike any human vessel Blake had ever seen. Dark metal hulls covered in strange symbols. Weapons arrays glowing with purple energy. These were Krathian warships. Blake recognized them from intelligence briefings. The Krathian Dominion controlled 12 star systems and had a reputation for aggressive expansion. Another explosion rocked the facility. Blake watched in horror as one of the biodomes collapsed. Atmosphere vented into space. Thousands of people lived in that dome. He grabbed his communicator and tried to reach the command center. Static. He tried the emergency channel. More static. The Krathian were jamming all communications. Blake ran into the corridor. Other officers were already moving toward the emergency stations. The facility shook again as more weapons fire struck the lunar surface. The lights flickered and died. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. Blake made his way to the command center, pushing through panicked crowds. Captain Alex Turner was in space when the attack began. He commanded a small warship called the Vengeance. His crew was running a routine supply mission to Mars when their sensors detected the explosions on the moon. Turner was 29 years old, young for a captain. Some people said he was too cocky, too confident, but he was a skilled pilot and his crew trusted him. Turner changed course immediately, pushing his engines to maximum speed. The journey from Mars to the moon would take hours. Hours during which his home was under attack. Hours during which people were dying. His hands gripped the controls until his knuckles turned white. He had friends on the moon, family. His sister worked in Luna City. Back on the moon, Blake finally reached the command center. The scene inside was chaos. Officers shouted into dead communicators. Screens showed destruction across Luna City. Casualty reports scrolled past too fast to read. A young lieutenant named Kyle Morrison looked up as Blake entered. Morrison was only 24, fresh from the academy. His face was pale with shock. Morrison reported what they knew. 3 Krathian dreadnoughts had appeared from faster-than-light travel. They attacked without any attempt at communication. The bombardment was systematic and brutal. They were targeting population centers and infrastructure. The defensive satellites were destroyed in the first 30 seconds. Human ships in orbit were scattered or disabled. Luna City was defenseless. Blake tried to contact his daughter. The communication lines to the medical center were down. He tried again and again. Nothing. A terrible fear grew in his chest. He pushed it down. He had a duty to perform. Personal concerns would have to wait. He began organizing the evacuation of critical personnel to underground shelters. The attack lasted 6 hours. When the Krathian ships finally stopped firing, over half of Luna City was destroyed. The beautiful biodomes that had taken decades to build were shattered. Mining facilities were collapsed ruins. Research stations were gone. The moon's surface was scarred with massive craters and trenches carved by plasma weapons. Blake stood in the command center, looking at the damage reports. The numbers were almost impossible to believe. 1.7 million dead, another 300,000 injured. Entire sections of the city were simply gone. He thought about his daughter. Her medical center was in one of those sections. He knew she was dead. He felt something break inside his chest. Then the Krathians sent their message. It came through on all frequencies, impossible to ignore. The message was simple and arrogant. Humanity had expanded too far into space. The Krathian Dominion claimed this territory. All human colonies beyond Earth's orbit must be abandoned. Humanity had 72 hours to comply. If they refused, Earth itself would be destroyed. The ultimatum was delivered by a Cretan military commander. The alien's voice was harsh and grating. It spoke of humanity as insects, as insignificant creatures that had forgotten their place. The commander promised that resistance would be met with complete annihilation. The Cretan had destroyed civilizations before. They would not hesitate to do it again. Blake listened to the message 3 times. Each time his anger grew colder and harder. These aliens had murdered his daughter. They had killed almost 2 million innocent people. And now they demanded surrender. They thought humanity would simply bow down and obey. They thought fear would be enough. Captain Turner arrived at the moon 12 hours after the attack ended. His ship moved slowly through the debris field that now orbited Luna City. Pieces of buildings floated in the void. Bodies drifted past his viewport. He had to look away. His crew worked in silence, their faces grim. They all had loved ones on the moon. They all feared the worst. Turner docked at one of the surviving airlocks and made his way to the command center. He found Blake standing alone, staring at a wall screen that showed the destroyed medical center. Turner had known Blake for years. The Admiral had always been strong, confident, in control. Now he looked like a broken old man. Blake turned to face Turner. His eyes were red but dry. He had cried all his tears hours ago. Now there was only cold fury. He asked Turner if his ship was operational. Turner confirmed that the Vengeance was undamaged and ready for orders. Blake nodded slowly. He said he had orders coming soon. Orders that would change everything. On Earth, the United Council convened an emergency session. Politicians argued about how to respond. Some wanted to negotiate. Others wanted to buy time by appearing to comply with the demands. A few brave souls called for immediate military action, but everyone knew the truth. Humanity's conventional military forces were no match for the Krathen. The aliens had superior technology, larger fleets, and more experience in warfare. Commander Victoria Stone sat in the council chamber, listening to the debate. She was 42 years old and led the Special Operations Division. Her job was handling missions that never appeared in official records. Black operations, wet work, the dirty jobs that kept humanity safe. Stone had cold eyes and a reputation for ruthlessness. She knew things that would horrify the politicians around her. Stone stood and requested permission to speak. The council fell silent. Everyone knew her reputation. She spoke clearly and without emotion. Conventional warfare would fail. Negotiation would fail. The Krathen had made their intentions clear. They viewed humanity as inferior and expendable. Appeasing them would only delay the inevitable. There was only one option left. Use the weapons that humanity had developed in secret. The weapons that were locked away because they were considered too dangerous, too immoral, too terrible to ever deploy. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. Several council members demanded to know what she was talking about. Stone smiled coldly. Did they really think humanity had stopped developing weapons after signing the Geneva Accords? Did they believe that military research had focused only on defensive systems? She could show them projects that would give them nightmares. Technologies that could end entire civilizations. Humanity had prepared for this day even while hoping it would never come. The council president demanded proof. Stone pulled out a datapad and transmitted a file to the main screen. Project names appeared: Reaper, Hellfire, Nemesis. Each one represented years of classified research. Each one represented the darkest possibilities of human innovation. The council members stared at the screen in silence. They had authorized funding for defensive research. They had never imagined this. Stone let them absorb the information. Then she spoke again. The Krathen had given humanity 72 hours. That was enough time to deploy these weapons. But the decision had to be made now. Once these weapons were used, there would be no going back. Humanity would cross a line that could never be uncrossed. The council would have to live with that choice for the rest of their lives. Back on the moon, Blake received a coded transmission from Earth. He read the message twice. Then he looked at Turner and Morrison. His face showed no emotion, but his hands trembled slightly. Earth had made its decision. The war was about to begin in earnest, and humanity was about to show the galaxy exactly what they were capable of when pushed to the edge of extinction. Deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, the military command center buzzed with activity. Blake had traveled from the moon to Earth within hours of receiving his orders. Now he stood in a conference room surrounded by the most powerful military leaders in the solar system. The room was cold and sterile, lit by harsh white lights that made everyone look tired and sick. General Patrick Hayes sat at the head of the table. He was 65 years old with a face carved from stone. Hayes had fought in 3 different conflicts during his career. He knew war. He knew death. But what they were about to discuss was something entirely different. Something that would haunt them all for whatever time they had left. Hayes activated the main screen. Numbers and statistics appeared. The Cretan fleet consisted of over 300 warships. Their technology was at least 50 years ahead of humanity's best efforts. In a conventional war, humanity would lose within a month. Maybe less. Earth would be conquered or destroyed. The colonies would fall. Billions would die. That was the reality they faced. Commander Stone stepped forward. She carried a metal case, which she placed on the table with a heavy thud. The case required 3 different security codes to open. Stone entered them carefully. Inside were data drives containing information so classified that only 5 people in the entire government knew it existed. Until now, Stone began her presentation. For 30 years, a secret research facility on Mars had been developing weapons that violated every treaty humanity had ever signed. These projects were funded through black budgets and hidden from public oversight. The scientists involved worked under false identities. Their families believed they were conducting routine research. None of them knew the full scope of what they were creating. The first weapon was called Project Reaper, self-replicating nanomachines designed to dismantle matter at the molecular level. Once released, these machines would spread like a virus, consuming everything in their path. Metal, plastic, organic tissue. Nothing would be safe. The machines could be programmed to target specific materials or structures. In theory, they could eat an entire fleet of ships in hours. Blake felt sick listening to the description. He asked how the machines could be stopped. Stone's answer was simple. They couldn't be stopped. Once deployed, they would continue replicating and consuming until they ran out of target materials. Then they would deactivate and become inert dust. But during that time, anything caught in their path would cease to exist. The second weapon was Project Hellfire, an artificial intelligence virus designed to infiltrate and corrupt computer systems. But this was not a simple hack. This AI was sophisticated beyond anything the civilian world had seen. It could learn, adapt, and evolve. Once inside an enemy network, it would take control of every connected system. Weapons would fire on friendly targets. Life support would shut down. Navigation would plot collision courses. The enemy's own technology would become their executioner. A scientist named Dr. Lisa Morgan entered the room. She was 39 years old with dark circles under her eyes. Morgan had led the development of these weapons for the past decade. She looked around the table at the military officers and felt a deep sense of dread. She had always hoped these weapons would never be used. They were supposed to be a deterrent, insurance against threats that might never materialize. Morgan explained that she had more projects to discuss. Project Nemesis involved quantum entanglement technology. In simple terms, they had found a way to create weapons that could strike across vast distances instantaneously. No travel time. No warning. A target could be hit the moment the weapon was fired, regardless of how many light years separated attacker and victim. There were biological weapons as well, agents specifically designed to target Cretan physiology. Morgan had obtained genetic samples from various sources over the years. Her team had created viruses that would be harmless to humans but lethal to Cretan. The aliens would become sick, their own immune systems attacking their bodies. Death would be slow and painful. The final weapon was the most terrifying, gravity well generators that could collapse local space-time. In effect, they created miniature black holes. Anything caught in the gravity field would be crushed down to nothing. Ships, stations, even planets could be destroyed. The weapon was unstable and difficult to control. Using it near Earth would risk catastrophic consequences. But deployed in deep space against an enemy fleet, it would be devastatingly effective. The room fell silent as Morgan finished her presentation. Nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, Blake asked the question everyone was thinking. If they used these weapons, what would that make them? Morgan met his eyes. She said it would make them survivors. But it would also make them something else. Something darker. Once you cross certain lines, you can never go back. You carry that weight forever. General Hayes called for a vote. Each officer would decide whether to authorize the deployment of these weapons. The vote had to be unanimous. If even one person objected, they would have to find another way. Hayes went around the table. One by one, the officers voted. Some did so quickly, their faces hard with determination. Others hesitated, clearly struggling with the decision. But in the end, every single person voted yes. Blake voted last. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the 2 million dead on the moon. He thought about the Kratheen message, arrogant and threatening. Then he raised his hand. Yes, authorization granted. The room seemed to grow colder. They had just agreed to unleash hell itself on their enemies. The preparations began immediately. Captain Turner and his crew were recalled to Earth. The Vengeance would be retrofitted with the nanomachine delivery systems. Turner listened to the briefing with growing horror. They wanted him to fly into the middle of a Kratheen fleet and release these machines. The mission was essentially suicide. But he volunteered anyway. His sister had died on the moon. He would do whatever it took to make the aliens pay. Dr. Morgan supervised the weapon installation personally. She worked alongside Turner's crew, making sure every system was properly integrated. The work took 40 hours straight. Morgan barely slept. She kept thinking about what these weapons would do. She had run simulations. She knew exactly how Kratheen would die when exposed to the nanomachines. The knowledge made her want to vomit. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Morrison worked with the Intelligence Division to locate the Kratheen fleet. Their sensors finally detected the enemy staging area in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. 300 ships gathered there, preparing for the final assault on Earth. The Kratheen were taking their time. They wanted humanity to feel fear, to understand that resistance was hopeless, that arrogance would be their downfall. Commander Stone assembled her special operations team. 20 soldiers, the best humanity had to offer. Their mission was to board a Kratheen command ship and upload the AI virus directly into the fleet's central network. Stone briefed them on what to expect. Kratheen were large, powerful creatures with natural armor and multiple limbs. They were formidable in close combat. The soldiers would need to move fast and hit hard. Casualties were expected. Stone made it clear that success was more important than survival. The team trained for 3 days. They practiced breaching techniques, close quarters combat, and rapid infiltration. Every soldier knew this was a one-way mission. Some wrote letters to their families. Others simply accepted their fate in silence. Stone watched them prepare and felt a strange mixture of pride and sadness. These people were about to sacrifice everything for humanity's survival. On the 4th day, they were ready. Turner's ship was loaded and prepared. Stone's team was equipped and briefed. The weapons were armed and tested. Blake stood on the command deck and looked at the tactical display. Red icons showed the Kratheen fleet waiting in the asteroid belt. Blue icons showed the human strike force preparing to launch. This was it, the moment that would define humanity's future. Blake opened a communication channel to all ships. His voice was calm and steady. He told them that what they were about to do would be remembered forever. They were not just fighting for Earth. They were fighting for every human colony in the solar system. They were fighting for the right to exist, to expand, to claim their place among the stars. The Kratheen had made a terrible mistake when they attacked the moon. They had awakened something in humanity that should have stayed sleeping. He ended his speech with a simple phrase. Show them what humans are capable of. Show them why they should have left us alone. The communication channel closed. Orders were transmitted. Engines ignited. The strike force launched from Earth orbit, accelerating toward the asteroid belt and the waiting enemy fleet. Dr. Morgan watched the ships disappear into the darkness of space. She felt tears running down her face. In a few hours, tens of thousands of beings would die in ways that violated every principle of ethical warfare. She had created the weapons that would kill them. That knowledge would haunt her for the rest of her life. But she had made her choice. Humanity would survive no matter the cost. Blake stood next to her watching the tactical display. He put a hand on her shoulder. She looked at him expecting to see anger or determination. Instead, she saw something that surprised her. Sadness. Deep, profound sadness. Blake understood what they had become. He understood. Captain Turner sat in the command chair of the Vengeance, watching the asteroid field grow larger on his view screen. Behind him, his crew worked in tense silence. They all knew what was about to happen. The Kratheen fleet waited somewhere in that field of spinning rocks and ice. 300 warships against 12 human vessels. The odds were insane. But the humans were not planning to fight conventionally. Turner checked the cargo bay readouts. 20,000 canisters filled with nanomachines. Each canister contained billions of the tiny machines, programmed to replicate and consume. The scientists said it would take less than an hour for the machines to completely dismantle a Kratheen warship. Turner tried not to think about what that meant for the crew inside those ships. His sensor officer called out a warning. Kratheen ships detected. 15 contacts. No, 20. The numbers kept climbing as more ships appeared on sensors. Turner smiled grimly. The enemy was taking the bait. The human ships had been deliberately visible during their approach. The Kratheen thought they were facing a desperate, hopeless attack. They had no idea what was really coming. The first energy blasts lit up the darkness. Kratheen plasma weapons reached across the void, striking at the human vessels. Turner's shields flared as his ship absorbed multiple hits. The Vengeance shook violently. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Turner gripped his armrests and shouted orders. Evasive maneuvers. All power to rear shields. Keep moving forward. The human ships scattered, each one drawing Kratheen pursuers deeper into the asteroid field. This was the plan. Spread the enemy fleet out. Make them chase. Get them away from their central command structure. Turner's ship wove between massive asteroids, using them for cover. Behind him, 3 Kratheen destroyers followed, their weapons blazing. Meanwhile, Commander Stone and her team drifted silently toward the Kratheen command carrier. Their insertion craft was disguised as debris, just another piece of wreckage floating in the asteroid field. The Kratheen sensors were focused on the active battle. They never noticed the small craft approaching their flagship. Stone watched through the craft's viewport as the massive carrier grew larger. The ship was enormous, easily 5 times the size of Earth's largest warship. Its hull was covered in weapon ports and sensor arrays. Thousands of Kratheen crew members worked inside that vessel. In a few minutes, many of them would be dead. Stone felt no guilt. They had started this war. The insertion craft attached to the carrier's hull with barely a sound. Stone's team moved quickly. They cut through the armor plating using molecular disruptors. The breach opened silently, venting a small amount of atmosphere before emergency seals kicked in. Stone led her team through the opening and into the Kratheen ship. The interior was dark and hot. The Kratheen preferred higher temperatures than humans. Stone's suit immediately began cooling her body. She moved forward, weapon raised. Her team spread out behind her in tactical formation. They had studied the layouts of Kratheen ships for months. They knew where the central data nexus would be located. They encountered the first Kratheen soldiers 2 corridors later. The aliens were massive, standing nearly 8 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in chitinous armor plates. Multiple arms held various weapons. The creatures made clicking sounds that might have been communication. Then they opened fire. The firefight was brief and brutal. Human weapons had been specifically designed to penetrate Kratheen armor. Explosive rounds tore through the aliens, dropping them in seconds. But the Kratheen fought back hard. Stone watched one of her soldiers take a plasma blast to the chest. The man went down and did not move. Another soldier stepped over his body and kept firing. They pushed forward, leaving dead Kratheen behind them. Alarms began wailing throughout the ship. The enemy knew they were aboard. More soldiers would be coming. Stone's team had maybe 10 minutes before they were overwhelmed. 10 minutes to complete their mission and escape. Back in the asteroid field, Turner's ship was taking heavy damage. His shields were down to 30%. Hull breaches in 3 sections. 2 of his engines were offline. But he had reached the designated coordinates. He opened a channel to the other human ships. All vessels confirmed they were in position. Time to spring the trap. Turner broadcast the activation code. Throughout the human fleet, cargo bays opened. Thousands of canisters ejected into space, spreading out in all directions. The Kratheen detected them immediately and tried to destroy the canisters with point defense weapons. But there were too many, moving too fast. Most of the canisters survived. The canisters ruptured on timers, releasing their contents into the void. At first, nothing visible happened. The nanomachines were too small to see with the naked eye. But within seconds, the Kratheen ships began to react. Their sensors detected something wrong. Massive system failures cascaded through multiple vessels. The nanomachines spread like an invisible plague. They consumed everything they touched. Metal hull plating dissolved into fine dust. Electronic systems failed as the machines ate through circuitry. The machines even found their way inside the ships, infiltrating through tiny gaps in ventilation systems. Turner watched his view screen in horrified fascination. The Kratheen destroyer that had been chasing him suddenly went dark. Its engines cut out. Atmosphere began venting from dozens of hull breaches. The ship drifted dead in space. Then it started to come apart. Sections of the hull simply dissolved. Internal structure became visible. Then that too began to break down. Within minutes, the massive warship was reduced to nothing but expanding clouds of dust. The same scene repeated throughout the asteroid field. Kratheen ships died one after another. Some tried to flee, but the nanomachines had already infiltrated their systems. Their engines failed. Life support shut down. The crews inside had only minutes to live. Some managed to evacuate in escape pods. Others were trapped as their ships disintegrated around them. Inside the command carrier, Stone's team reached the data nexus. Lieutenant Danny Cross immediately began working on the upload. His fingers flew across his portable terminal, bypassing Kratheen security systems. The AI virus was massive, nearly a terabyte of malicious code. The upload would take several minutes. Minutes they might not have. Stone positioned her remaining soldiers around the entrance. They could hear Kratheen forces approaching. Heavy footsteps, clicking communication sounds. The enemy was organizing a counterattack. Stone checked her ammunition. Half a magazine left. She looked at her team. They were down to 12 people. The soldiers' faces showed exhaustion and fear, but also determination. They would hold this position no matter what. The Kratheen attacked in force. Dozens of soldiers poured into the corridor, firing as they came. Stone's team returned fire, dropping aliens with precise shots. But there were too many. The Kratheen kept coming, stepping over their own dead. Stone took a glancing hit to her shoulder. The impact spun her around. She kept firing. Cross shouted that the upload was at 90%, almost done. Stone's team was being pushed back. 3 more soldiers went down. The Kratheen were nearly at the Nexus entrance. Stone made a decision. She pulled a grenade from her belt and threw it down the corridor. The explosion bought them a few more seconds. The upload completed at 97%. Good enough. Cross activated the virus and pulled his terminal free. Stone triggered the extraction signal. They had to get out now. Her team fought their way back toward the breach point. Behind them, the Kratheen ship's systems began to fail. The AI virus spread through the network like cancer, corrupting everything it touched. Throughout the fleet, connected systems started malfunctioning. Weapons turned on each other. Navigation computers plotted collision courses. Some ships opened fire on their own vessels. Others simply lost all power and drifted helplessly. The Kratheen fleet, organized and powerful minutes ago, descended into complete chaos. Stone's team reached their insertion craft with only 8 survivors. They sealed the hatch and disengaged from the carrier. Behind them, the massive ship was dying. Explosions rippled across its hull as internal systems failed. The carrier began to break apart, its structural integrity compromised by both the nanomachines that had reached it and the chaos caused by the virus. Turner received the extraction signal. The mission was complete. He opened a channel to the fleet. All ships withdraw to Rally Point Beta. The human vessels turned and accelerated away from the dying Kratheen fleet. Behind them, 300 warships became 300 tombs. The asteroid field was filled with debris and bodies. The Kratheen Dominion's greatest fleet had been destroyed in less than an hour. Not a single human ship was lost. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Admiral Blake stood in the command center on Earth, watching the tactical display update in real time. Green icons showed human ships safely withdrawing from the asteroid field. Red icons showed Kratheen vessels. Most of those red icons were now gray, indicating destroyed or disabled ships. The battle, if it could even be called that, was over. Humanity had won. Around him, officers were celebrating. People shook hands and hugged. Someone was crying with relief. But Blake felt nothing. He looked at the final casualty count. 83,000 Kratheen dead. Most had died when their ships disintegrated around them. Others suffocated as life support failed. Some had been killed by their own weapons when the AI virus turned the fleet against itself. It had been a slaughter. Blake sent the prepared message to the Kratheen homeworld. It was simple and direct. Humanity had destroyed the invasion fleet without losing a single ship. If the Kratheen continued their aggression, Earth would deploy these weapons against every Krathian colony, every ship, every military installation. The Dominion had 24 hours to transmit a formal surrender and withdraw all forces from human territory. Otherwise, the Krathian species would cease to exist. The response came in less than 18 hours. The Krathian government transmitted their complete and unconditional surrender. They agreed to withdraw from all contested territories. They would pay reparations to the families of those killed on the moon. They would never again threaten human space. The message was filled with apologetic language and promises of peaceful coexistence. The proud Krathian Dominion had been broken in a single engagement. Earth celebrated. News of the victory spread across all human colonies. People poured into the streets cheering and waving flags. Blake was declared a hero. His face appeared on every news channel. Military analysts praised his brilliant strategy. Politicians gave speeches about humanity's technological superiority and inevitable destiny among the stars. But not everyone was celebrating. Dr. Lisa Morgan sat alone in her laboratory on Mars, reviewing the data from the battle. The nanomachines had performed exactly as designed. Maybe too well. She read medical reports from the few Krathian survivors. The machines had infiltrated their bodies through every breath. The aliens had died slowly as the machines consumed them from the inside. It had not been a clean death. Morgan received messages from other scientists. Many expressed horror at what had been deployed. Several prominent researchers resigned from government positions in protest. Academic institutions debated whether to revoke military research funding. Morgan herself considered resigning. She had created weapons of mass destruction and watched them kill tens of thousands. The fact that those victims were aliens did not make it easier to bear. Captain Turner returned to Earth a decorated hero. He received medals and honors. People wanted to shake his hand and hear stories about the battle. But Turner could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Krathian ships dissolving into dust. He heard their distress calls over the communication channels. Voices filled with confusion and terror as their own technology turned against them. One night, Turner received a message from a Krathian civilian. The alien ship had been damaged in the battle, but escaped before the nanomachines could complete their work. The message was brief and haunting. "Why did you do this to us? Our military made a mistake. They should not have attacked your moon. But did our children deserve to die? Did our families deserve this fate?" Turner stared at the message for hours. He tried to formulate a response. What could he say? That humanity was just defending itself? That the Krathian military had forced their hand? That war was hell and civilians always suffered? Every answer felt hollow. He finally deleted the message without responding. But he could not delete it from his memory. Commander Stone accepted her commendations with a blank face. She had lost 12 soldiers on that mission. Good people who had died following her orders. Their names haunted her. She visited their families, trying to offer comfort. But what could she say? Your son died so we could upload a virus. Your daughter died so we could exterminate an entire fleet. The words felt inadequate. The political fallout began within days. Opposition parties in the Earth Council demanded investigations. How had such weapons been developed without public knowledge? Who had authorized the funding? Why had elected officials been kept in the dark? Protesters gathered outside government buildings demanding accountability. Some called for war crime tribunals. Counter-protesters argued that Blake and his people had saved humanity. The Krathian would have exterminated billions without hesitation. These weapons, however terrible, had prevented human extinction. The debate grew heated and divisive. Families were split over the issue. Friends stopped speaking to each other. The victory had come with a social cost that nobody had anticipated. Blake was summoned to testify before the council. He stood before the assembled politicians and spoke clearly. He made no apologies. The Krathian had attacked without provocation. They had killed nearly 2 million civilians. They had threatened to exterminate humanity. In the face of extinction, any weapon was justified. Any action was acceptable. He had made the hard choice that politicians were too afraid to make. When asked if he would make the same decision again, Blake answered without hesitation. Absolutely. A council member asked if he felt any remorse for the Krathian who died. Blake thought about his daughter. He thought about the 2 million dead on the moon. Then he said that he felt remorse for every death in this war. But he felt no guilt. Guilt implied wrongdoing. He had done what was necessary. News of the battle spread across the galaxy. Other alien civilizations took notice. Humanity, the newcomers who had barely been in space for 3 centuries, had demonstrated weapon technology that terrified even ancient races. Some species reached out with offers of alliance. They wanted humanity's protection. Others imposed trade embargoes and travel restrictions. They feared what humans might do if provoked. The Galactic Concordat, a loose confederation of peaceful species, debated whether to accept humanity as members. Some argued that humans had only defended themselves and deserved recognition. Others claimed that the nature of the weapons used demonstrated that humanity was too dangerous for civilized society. The debate lasted for months without resolution. Lieutenant Morrison, promoted to commander after the battle, led humanity's diplomatic outreach. He traveled to various alien worlds trying to build bridges. He spoke passionately about humanity's desire for peace, but his words were undercut by the implicit threat. Everyone knew what humans were capable of. Fear made a poor foundation for friendship. Morrison met with representatives from dozens of species. Some were sympathetic. Others were openly hostile. All of them wanted to know the same thing. Would humanity use those weapons again? Morrison gave the only honest answer he could. If humanity's survival was threatened, yes. Any species would do the same in their position. His honesty was appreciated but not reassuring. Dr. Morgan had a private meeting with Admiral Blake. She told him that she regretted creating the weapons. They were meant to be deterrents, insurance policies against threats that might never come. Now that they had been used, she feared what would happen next. Other nations would try to replicate the technology. An arms race was inevitable. The galaxy had become more dangerous, not less. Blake acknowledged her concerns. But he remained firm in his position. The universe was hostile. Humanity had to be willing to meet that hostility with equal force. Weakness would only invite more attacks. Morgan asked him a difficult question. Did he believe the ends justified the means? Blake's response was simple. History was written by survivors. The dead had no voice. Morgan left the meeting feeling disturbed. Blake was not wrong. Survival was the ultimate imperative. But at what cost? If humanity survived by becoming monsters, what did that say about them as a species? She had no answer to that question. Perhaps there was no good answer. Months passed. The initial celebration faded into complicated reflection. Schools began teaching about the battle. Children learned about humanity's great victory. But thoughtful teachers also asked difficult questions. Was it right to use such terrible weapons? Could the same result have been achieved through different means? The younger generation would inherit both the victory and the moral burden that came with it. Blake received thousands of messages from families of the moon victims. Most thanked him for avenging their loved ones. But some asked uncomfortable questions. Would bringing back the dead make the Krathene deaths acceptable? Did revenge heal the wounds or just create new scars? Blake read every message but responded to none. He had no comfort to offer. He could only live with his choices. The weapons remained in storage, carefully guarded and maintained. They were not destroyed. Humanity had crossed a line and could not go back. The weapons existed now. That could not be changed. The only question was whether they would be used again. Blake hoped the answer was no. But he knew hope was not a strategy. In a dangerous galaxy, humanity needed teeth. And now everyone knew exactly how sharp those teeth were. 2 years had passed since the battle in the asteroid field. The moon was slowly healing. New biodomes rose from the ruins of Luna City, their clear surfaces gleaming in Earth's light. Construction crews worked around the clock, rebuilding what the Krathene had destroyed. But some scars could never be erased. Memorial parks covered several square kilometers of the lunar surface. Names were carved into black stone walls. 1.7 million names. Admiral Blake visited the memorial every month. He would stand before the wall section that held his daughter's name. Sarah Blake, Doctor, age 34. He would touch the carved letters with his fingertips and remember her smile. Then he would leave without saying a word. Humanity had changed in those 2 years. The military budget had tripled. New warships patrolled every corner of human space. Each vessel was equipped with advanced weapons, though not the terrible arsenal used in the battle. Those weapons remained locked away in secure facilities, guarded by soldiers who had orders to destroy them, rather than let them fall into enemy hands. the Galactic Concordat finally agreed to meet with human representatives. The summit would take place on a neutral space station called Haven, orbiting a dim star in unclaimed territory. Admiral Blake led the human delegation, along with Commander Morrison and Dr. Lisa Morgan. The decision to include Morgan had been controversial. Many politicians felt she represented the darkest aspects of human capability, but Blake insisted. If anyone could speak honestly about the weapons, it was the woman who created them. The station was impressive. Multiple species had contributed to its construction. Alien architecture blended in strange but beautiful ways. The humans were met by representatives from 7 different civilizations. Some were humanoid. Others were so alien that human minds struggled to understand their basic biology. All of them looked at the human delegation with a mixture of curiosity and fear. The first day of talks was formal and cautious. The alien species acknowledged humanity's right to self-defense. They expressed sympathy for the victims of the Luna attack, but they also voiced concerns about the weapons humanity had deployed. Such technology was destabilizing. It upset the balance of power in the galaxy. Several species proposed a treaty limiting the development and use of weapons of mass destruction. Blake listened politely, but made no commitments. He explained that humanity would not disarm while threats existed. The Krathene attack had proven that the galaxy was dangerous. Until humanity felt secure, they would maintain whatever capabilities were necessary for their survival. His words were diplomatic but firm. The message was clear. Humanity would not be dictated to. On the third day, Dr. Morgan surprised everyone by breaking with Blake's position. She stood before the assembled delegates and made a radical proposal. Humanity would share the technical specifications of their weapons with the Concordat, not freely but under strict conditions. The weapons would be held in trust by a neutral council. They could only be deployed if a species faced genocide. By making the technology available to all, no single civilization could claim superiority. The proposal created immediate chaos. Alien delegates began arguing among themselves. Blake pulled Morgan aside, his face red with anger. What was she doing? She had no authority to make such offers. This completely undermined their negotiating position. Morgan met his fury with calm determination. The weapons existed. They could not be uninvented. The only path forward was transparency and collective responsibility. Otherwise, an arms race was inevitable. Blake wanted to reject the proposal immediately, but Commander Morrison stepped in. He pointed out that Morgan's idea might actually strengthen humanity's position. If they volunteered to share the technology under controlled conditions, they would appear cooperative rather than threatening. It would build trust and establish humanity as a responsible power. Blake was not convinced, but he agreed to let the debate continue. The negotiations lasted for weeks. Various species had different concerns and priorities. The Tellarians worried about the biological weapons specifically. The Vex wanted guarantees that the AI virus could not be modified to target their silicon-based systems. The Karathi demanded verification protocols to ensure compliance. Slowly, painfully, a framework began to emerge. The final agreement was called the Prometheus Accords. The name was chosen by Morgan, after the ancient human myth of the Titan who gave fire to humanity. Fire could warm or destroy. Like these weapons, the Accords established strict guidelines. Species could develop weapons of mass destruction for defensive purposes, but they had to register them with the Concordat. Use required approval from a council of neutral arbiters except in cases of imminent extinction. Violations would trigger a unified military response from all member species. The message was clear. Use these weapons unjustly and face the combined might of the galaxy. It was not a perfect system. Enforcement would be difficult. Loopholes existed, but it was better than nothing. It was a start. Humanity signed the Accords. The Krathene, chastened by their defeat, also signed. One by one, other species added their agreement. Not everyone was happy with the terms. Some human politicians felt Blake had given away too much. Some alien species felt humanity was still being treated too leniently. But the Accords held. For the first time, the galaxy had agreed on rules for the most terrible weapons. Blake returned to Earth exhausted. The negotiations had taken a toll on him. He was 60 years old now and felt every day of it. He submitted his retirement request the following week. His time was done. He had saved humanity and helped establish a new order in the galaxy. That would have to be enough. The council accepted his retirement with honors. A parade was held. Speeches were given. Blake stood through it all with a blank expression. In his retirement, Blake moved to a small apartment on the moon. He lived simply, refusing interviews and public appearances. Every morning he would walk to the memorial. He would spend an hour there, sitting on a bench and looking at the names. History would debate whether he was a hero or a war criminal. Blake accepted that burden. He had made hard choices. He had saved billions of lives. Whether that justified the means was a question he could not answer. Dr. Morgan left government service entirely. She established a private research institute focused on peaceful applications of advanced technology. Her work attracted the best scientists from across human space. Some of her former colleagues joined her. Together they worked on medical advances, environmental restoration, and technologies that could improve life rather than destroy it. It would not undo what she had created, but perhaps it would balance the scales. Captain Turner left the military and became a commercial pilot. He flew cargo runs between colonies, spending months in space away from crowds and attention. He avoided media interviews and public events. The nightmares had faded over time, but they never disappeared entirely. Sometimes he would wake in his bunk, sweating and shaking, hearing Krathene distress calls echoing in his memory. Commander Morrison became humanity's chief ambassador to the Concordat. He spent his days building relationships with alien species, negotiating trade agreements and resolving disputes before they could escalate into violence. The work was exhausting and often frustrating. Progress came slowly, but it was necessary. Every peaceful resolution was a victory, however small. Every day without war was worth celebrating. Commander Stone remained in military service, leading special operations. She trained the next generation of soldiers, teaching them the skills they would need in a dangerous galaxy. She was hard on her recruits but fair. She told them the truth about war. It was not glorious. It was not heroic. It was terrible and ugly and necessary. If they could not accept that truth, they should find another career. The Krathene slowly recovered from their defeat. Their government had changed. The military leaders who authorized the Luna attack had been executed. New leadership focused on rebuilding their economy and re-establishing diplomatic relations. Some Krathene wanted revenge, but most simply wanted to be left alone. They had learned the cost of aggression. 10 years passed. Then 20. A new generation came of age on both sides. Young humans learned about the war in history classes. They visited the memorials and heard stories from veterans. But to them it was ancient history. They lived in a galaxy where humanity was established and respected. They took that security for granted, not understanding the price that had been paid. Young Krathene learned about the battle as a cautionary tale. This is what happens when you underestimate an opponent. This is the cost of arrogance. Some felt shame. Others felt anger that lingered beneath the surface. The wounds had healed, but the scars remained. Dr. Morgan, now in her 60s, was invited to speak at a military academy graduation. She stood before hundreds of young cadets in their crisp uniforms. They looked so eager, so ready to serve. Morgan felt a wave of sadness. These children had no idea what they were preparing for. They thought war was about honor and duty. They would learn the truth eventually. She told them about the weapons she had created. She described what they did, how they killed, the suffering they caused. The cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not the inspirational speech they expected. Morgan did not care. They needed to hear this. She told them that humanity had won their war. 25 years after the Luna strike, the galaxy had changed in ways nobody could have predicted. Humanity was now a major power in the Concordat, with representatives on every major council. Human ships explored distant sectors that no species had visited in centuries. Trade agreements brought prosperity to colonies across human space. The war with the Krathene felt like ancient history to most people. But in a secure military facility beneath Earth's surface, the weapons waited. The nanomachines, the AI virus, the quantum weapons, all carefully maintained and ready for deployment. Guards rotated every 6 hours. Security protocols required 3 separate authorizations to access the storage chambers. The weapons had not been used since the battle, but they had not been forgotten. Admiral Henry Blake died peacefully in his sleep at age 79. He had spent his final years on the moon. never far from the memorial where his daughter's name was carved. The funeral was attended by thousands. Military honors were given. Speeches praised his service and sacrifice. But the real debate about his legacy would continue for generations. Hero or war criminal? Savior or monster? Perhaps he was both. The younger generation of military officers who rose to replace Blake had never seen real war. They trained and prepared, but combat remained theoretical. They studied the asteroid field battle extensively. It was the perfect example of asymmetric warfare, a smaller force using superior technology to defeat a larger enemy. The officers admired the tactics and strategy. Most of them did not think deeply about the cost. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Carter was one of these young officers. At 36, he commanded a fleet patrol group on the edge of human space. He was competent and confident, with a record of successful missions. He had studied the war extensively and believed he understood what Blake had done. It was simple mathematics. 80,000 Krathene dead versus billions of humans saved. The choice was obvious. Then the message arrived from deep space. A species humanity had never encountered sent a desperate plea for help. The Valine were a peaceful civilization of roughly 8 billion individuals spread across 3 star systems. They were being invaded by an aggressive empire called the Score. The Score had already destroyed 2 Valine colonies. Millions were dead. The survivors begged for assistance. The message specifically mentioned humanity's response to the Krathene attack. The Valine had heard the stories. They knew about the terrible weapons. They were asking humanity to use those weapons again, to save them the way humanity had saved itself. The moral calculus seemed simple. Save billions or let them die, just like before. The message reached Earth and created immediate debate. Some politicians argued for intervention. Humanity had a responsibility to protect weaker species. Others counseled caution. Getting involved in other species' conflicts would set a dangerous precedent. The military leaders were divided. Some saw an opportunity to demonstrate human power. Others remembered the cost of that power. Commander Kyle Morrison, now in his 50s and serving as Earth's senior ambassador, argued strongly against intervention. He pointed out that the situation was fundamentally different from the Krathene attack. The Score had not attacked humanity. They posed no direct threat. Using the weapons to interfere in another species' conflict would violate the spirit of the Prometheus Accords. It would make humanity the aggressor, but public opinion was shifting. News channels showed footage of destroyed Valine cities, refugee ships carrying survivors, children who had lost their families. The images were heartbreaking. Protesters gathered outside government buildings demanding action. How could humanity stand by and watch genocide when they had the power to stop it? Were Valine lives worth less than human lives? Dr. Lisa Morgan, now 74 and retired from active research, was asked to testify before the council. She walked slowly to the podium, her body weakened by age but her mind still sharp. She spoke clearly about the nature of the weapons she had created. She reminded them that these tools were not surgical. They were not precise. They killed indiscriminately. Using them would make humanity responsible for thousands of deaths. Morgan also pointed out something that many had forgotten. Once you use such weapons as an offensive tool rather than defensive, you change the equation. Blake had deployed them to prevent human extinction. That was self-defense, however brutal. Using them to intervene in someone else's war was different. It made humanity the galaxy's enforcer, the galaxy's judge and executioner. Did they really want that responsibility? The council debated for weeks. Public pressure grew stronger. The Valine sent more messages, increasingly desperate. 2 more colonies fell to the Score. Death counts climbed into the tens of millions. Finally, a vote was called. The measure to authorize intervention failed by a single vote. Humanity would not deploy the weapons. They would offer humanitarian aid and diplomatic support, but they would not become involved militarily. The decision was massively unpopular. Protests turned violent in several cities. Politicians who voted against intervention received death threats. The government was accused of cowardice and moral bankruptcy, but the decision stood. Humanity would not cross that line. The weapons had been used once in self-defense. Using them again for different reasons would change everything. 6 months later, the Score invasion ended. Not because of outside intervention, but because the Valine mounted a desperate resistance that made the conquest too costly to continue. The Score withdrew. leaving 3 devastated star systems behind. 20 million Valine were dead, but the species survived. They would rebuild. It would take generations, but they would recover. The Valine sent a final message to Earth. It was not what anyone expected. They thanked humanity for not intervening. An elder Valine explained their reasoning. If humanity had deployed their weapons, the Valine would have been saved. But they also would have become dependent. They would have owed humanity a debt that could never be repaid. By choosing to fight and suffer, the Valine had proved to themselves that they could survive. That knowledge was worth more than easy rescue. The message did not satisfy everyone. Many still believed intervention would have been the moral choice. The debate continued in universities and public forums. But something had shifted in how humanity viewed itself. The weapons remained in storage. They would stay there unless humanity itself was threatened. That was the line that would not be crossed again. 30 years after the Luna strike, a historian named Professor Angela Graham published a comprehensive study of the war and its aftermath. Her book was controversial and deeply researched. She interviewed survivors on both sides. She obtained classified documents through official channels. She analyzed every decision and consequence. Her conclusion was nuanced and uncomfortable. Graham argued that Blake had made the only possible choice given the information he had. The Krathine were an existential threat. Conventional warfare would have failed. Humanity would have been exterminated. In that context, using the weapons was justified. But she also argued that the weapons should never have been created in the first place. The existence of such technology created moral hazards that would haunt humanity forever. The book became required reading in military academies and university ethics programs. It sparked debates that continued for years. Some praised Graham for her balanced approach. Others attacked her from both sides, claiming she either justified atrocities or failed to appreciate necessary sacrifice. The controversy proved that the questions raised by the war had no easy answers. Captain Alex Turner, now in his 60s, read Graham's book with mixed feelings. She had interviewed him extensively for the chapter on the asteroid field battle. Reading his own words in print was strange. He barely recognized the young man he had been. The confident pilot who believed in clear solutions and decisive action. War had complicated him in ways he could never have imagined. Turner still flew occasionally, though he had officially retired. Sometimes he would take his small ship out beyond the edge of the solar system and just drift in the silence of space. Out there, away from civilization and noise, he could think clearly. He had stopped having nightmares years ago. The memories had faded into something manageable, but they never disappeared entirely. Some things you carry forever. Dr. Morgan died peacefully at age 82, surrounded by former students and colleagues. Her research institute had grown into a major scientific center, employing thousands and making breakthrough discoveries in medicine and technology. Her legacy was complicated, just like Blake's. She had created weapons of mass destruction, but she had also spent decades trying to balance that darkness with light. History would judge whether she succeeded. Commander Victoria Stone retired at age 70, having served longer than anyone expected. She had trained 3 generations of special operations soldiers. Some had gone on to distinguished careers. Others had died in service. She remembered all their names. In retirement, Stone lived alone in a cabin in the Canadian wilderness. She avoided visitors and media requests. Some burdens you carry in silence. Ambassador Morrison served until he was 65, then retired to teach at a university. His classes on interstellar diplomacy were popular and challenging. He taught students that peace was harder than war. War had clear objectives and measurable